Thank you all. Just before we start though, I just want to say, can we give a round of applause to all the speakers, technicians, and the people who are helping put this event together, if you wouldn't mind. It sounds more impressive to them outside, so thank you for boosting my ego just a little bit. So, yeah, thank you. So we're going to crack on with this and talking a bit more. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, a lot of nods. I've got a nice smooth jazz voice, so I'm hoping, you know what I mean, no one misses out on this. So we'll be talking about many things throughout this, so I'll just give you a quick overview about what this talk's going to cover. We're telling you a bit about who I am. As you know, it's a bit about level design and also how I've learned about mental mapping. Sadly, the talk's changed slightly. That's my fault for not updating. That's my bad there. There is a bit more about shape theory, but I'll be talking about mental mapping so you can help guide players so they don't get lost. We'll also talk what is a mental map? Why is this important? Why is it important from my perspective as a level designer? And then finally, how do we create this? Over my time, I've learned a lot about why it's important and different techniques in order to guide the player. So firstly, who am I? Well, other than having that smooth jazz voice, I've been working in the industry now for over 5 years. I've worked on a range of titles, from mobile to indie and currently AAA. So I've learned a lot in my time. I write about games in my spare time as well as do a podcast. So I like to talk a lot about video games. And as many of you know, I'm a level designer. So this is my perspective on mental mapping, why it's important from my side, why we as level designers rely on this. So many of you probably already know what a level designer does, but I just want to break it down in a bit more detail because I sometimes see online people get confused between environment art and level design. As level designers, we create the spaces that players interact with. Now this can take many forms, whether it be those big, monstrous levels you see in Call of Duty, to the kind of smaller but also exhilarating ones that you see in something like Angry Birds. Any space that the player is interacting with, we are responsible for that and how they interact within that space as well. Alongside environment art, we're the architects of this virtual world. Now, most games are going on and creating these spaces that we move through. So it's our role to make sure that these spaces make logical sense to you as players. So working together, we make sure that people do not get lost and they do not feel out of place because of this. We also control the flow of the missions, making sure that those downbeats don't last too long and it feels very boring and dull, and making sure that we just don't throw enemies constantly at you to the point where you're frustrated and get annoyed. It is a very, very big, important factor to make sure that you can help guide the player. They need to know what their objectives are and how to reach them and what's the path to get there. And then depending on the company you're at, you can also find that you'll do a bit of scripting in order to make sure that that happens. And guiding this is what this comes under. This is what mental mapping comes under. It comes under guiding the player. There's many different techniques in order to do this. That from what we see of God of War, Naughty Dog are some of the best with their leading lines, and landmarks as well. Many different ways that you can do it. Because if you don't help guide the player to understand your space, well then, it can lead to frustration. And that's the last thing we as creators ever want. Now, when I'm talking about guiding the player though, I'm not on about using UI. Recently, with games like Destiny and The Division, a lot more games are relying heavily on UI. But you as a level designer should not rely on that. UI is a great and powerful thing in order to make great games. However, making sure that you are relying on this, it's not great for you as a level designer. Once you strip that back, you need to make sure that the player understands your space right away. Now, the great thing is stuff like Zelda Breath of the Wild and God of War are less heavy on UI. So that means more responsibility is falling on us as level designers. It's a bit of pressure, but we like it. We like the pressure. Now let's talk about, well, what is mental mapping, Max? Well, bless you. So mental mapping is basically the player understanding the space. In this beautiful diagram that I've made, some of you may be wondering why I'm not an artist. Well, you've got to understand that when you think about this here, this base of operations in the center, that's where we are. But the player needs to know that if they are to head south, then they'll find a city. Yet if they were to head to the west, then maybe they're going to encounter some sort of enemies. It's the player understanding how these spaces are all connected, how they interact with one another, so that the players understand how to move and move through your levels. Now, why is it important? Honestly, mental mapping is not something new to level design or exclusively to it. Mental mapping is what we do as people, as human beings. When you think about the time when we were at, these packs, hunters and gatherers, if you were separated and didn't know the area, then your chance of survival was pretty much gone. You couldn't survive if you didn't know where your tribe was. So we've been doing this for generations, understanding the space around us. But time has changed. We're not under threat of saber-toothed tigers or anything like that. So think about why it's important to us then as level designers. Firstly, it allows us to achieve that state of flow. If you think of the famous quote from Bruce Lee, "Be like water," you want the player to flow and crash into your level at the right time so that they're constantly immersed in it, that they constantly want to go on and explore from this. Another one is through the achievement of mastery. If you think about now, esports is becoming a much bigger and bigger kind of platform and sport, that when players, such as these pro ones, take Overwatch, for example, they need to understand how their characters interact with the spaces, how they can get a different advantage when playing in these maps. So when you have an understanding and allow the players to understand your space, they'll feel that they're mastering it in order to feel that they are progressing as well. And then finally, we just don't want players to get confused and annoyed. That's why it's important to us. So how do we create them? This is a great quote from Grant, who is an architect. As I said, this is not an exclusive thing to level design. But what he's saying here is that it all comes from our past experiences. When you go to a restaurant, you expect to know that there is a kitchen and a toilet probably in there. If not, it might not be a restaurant and you may just want to leave. But from this, we create our own maps, our own understandings from it. If you're driving along the freeway or the highway, you know that eventually there will be a service stop. You know this because of your past experiences. And then there's other ways that we do it as well. There's many different sort of things that can help players understand where they are. When you think about these certain landmarks, these sort of strange buildings, I'm sure many of you recognize that one, and also think about the sound surrounding it, the roads, and then finally you can use colors. All of these things help to create that understanding of your space. Oh, if I turn left at the strange building, I'll be on the big main road. And if I follow that down and turn right, then I'll be at the yellow building. It's about understanding how they all connect. That is what's a really interesting thing, and that's what helps people create a mental map. Now, during my research from this, I said research to impress you all. You can all ooh a little bit. There you go. There we go. So what's really cool when I was doing my research from this was there's a great theory out there about psychology about how we understand space. That if you think about your partner or your close family, you then let them a lot closer to you. If it's just a friend, they're a bit further away. In this space that we're in now, we'd be more in that social space. You're all close, but as you can see, there's a lot of chairs where you're not sat next to one another because you don't know one another that well. And subconsciously, that's ingrained into us because we've learned that from our parents and from understanding people. And that's all fancy talk, but I think this can be applied to level design as well. So the first one is intimate space. When we talk about intimate space, we're talking about a safe space for the player, a space for them to feel where they are safe and they don't feel threatened. Now, I worked in the division, and one of the ways we created this was through these safe houses, and ways that we made them feel that they were an intimate and safe space, all because such things as the roof was lower, so they knew that they were encompassed and they were sheltered. There was no combat in these spaces, again, making them feel that they were okay to mess around and talk to other players here as well. And as you can see from the bottom image here, there's quite a lot of UI icons. It's the Ubisoft way, don't blame me. But what's really cool is in the red circles, they're all the safe houses there. And the reason we placed them throughout is because we knew players would want to break from the action. We knew that players would want to have a moment to themselves, a downbeat to breathe. So this is why it's important to have intimate spaces, to have contrast, and for allowing players to make the understanding of a map towards those different spaces. Now, that's cool, but also, I think intimate space can be applied to your actual level design for those with combat encounters as well. Here's a layout I did on the division. Now, in the far back, where you can see that nice tree in the background, that's where the encounter takes place. And before we got there, though, I wanted to create a space for the player to feel safe, to feel that they had a moment to breathe before just going in guns blazing. And the way I did this is by creating this intimate space here. And how did I make that space feel intimate? Well, firstly, I raised the player so they're on this truck bed, because it's easier to shoot down than it is to shoot up. And because of that, they now feel much more in control, much more powerful than previously had they started in the same area. Also, they have about 270 degrees of cover. They have that barrier in front of them, the truck head to the left, and also this knocked over newsstand to the right. So now they feel safe with all this cover around them, knowing that if they get shot, they're probably going to get a few bullets that go over them. Another way that we did this was through framing. Here we have these absolutely amazing pillars, which are high cover, so again, they feel even safer from this. But also, if you look, it makes a nice frame to where the combat encounter is going to take place. And because of that, they knew they had a few seconds to wait in contrast of just going in and shooting. So that way they feel a lot more safer in it. We also did it with lighting, as you can see, that you're in this natural light, the darkness, most people are afraid of the dark and wondering what's in it. So again, this is really nice to help them feel that they're safe in that spot. And what's really cool is after you complete this encounter, there's a few other encounters around this area. And what's really cool is once we noticed that this mission was complete, even if people found enemies along the street, they would head to that truck because they knew it was a strong and safe position for them. So I thought it was really interesting. Next, we have personal space. And as a level designer, this is probably the most common space you'll find in your levels. This is such things as corridors, rooms full of loot or puzzles, these sort of things. And what's really nice about these spaces is simple that you can change this based on your genre. You can change the impact of this for your different style. If we take two games, for example, this is Resident Evil 2. Wow, does this not? The sound's playing, but the video is not. Is there a way to... Sorry guys, I'm teasing you with sound right now, so making audio feel important. Oh boy. Okay. So you can hear the crazy, creepy sound, but basically what's happened is the fact that you here are going through this corridor, and this is the corridor which many of you will know if you've played Resident Evil 2, is where you first encounter the brain licker. And what's really interesting is you've been through this corridor multiple times. It's only about 4 meters wide. But because you've been here multiple times, you eventually find that this new enemy type has dropped down and scared the absolute living shit out of you. Sorry for my bad words. But what's really nice about that is this space, which once was felt safe, that once you knew it, was now subverted into something that was scary, a tight space where you couldn't run away from this enemy, that you had to discover it on your own. I'm sure you got a much nicer visual impact than the video from me telling you anyway. Then we have, this is Doom. Is there any way to, can you click the play button on the Mac, mate? Jazz hands. Yep. Nope. So, how's everyone's day going? Having a good time? Yeah? Yeah? It's all good. Anyone been to any good talks? It's all right, you don't have to say this one, guys. We've already proven. We can just skip it if you want, mate. It's all good. Okay, I'll describe what happens in Doom. Has anyone seen the Doom Eternal announcement trailer? Okay, cool. So it's that nice moment at the beginning where you're loading your gun and then you head through the subway station and you see this massive opening that shows you the massive world of hell that you're now in. Now, if you look at that more closely, that again is only 4 meters wide. It's a corridor. But what they're able to do is by creating this massive crack to reveal more information, it feels different. It feels like you're in a completely different space compared to that of Resident Evil. And what I'm saying is with these personal spaces, you're able to create a different experience depending on your genre just by using small techniques, even though the same space is the same width and that. Okay, the next slide is really cool as well. I'm building up anticipation, honestly. It's just so good, I just want you to wait for a while. Don't worry. Okay, well, I haven't played Battlefield, so I'm not going to say I can't share on that one. But think about intimate space in terms of if you're playing like a Call of Duty or another shooter. It's a spot where basically that they are in a strong point of cover, the space where they don't feel threatened and stuff. Such things as when you're in, if you think about probably that spot over here, some of you can't see, but that's a really wide pillar here. That would be an intimate space because you've got a lot of cover here around you. And also you know that people can't come in from behind here. So that way that would feel intimate in terms of you know that enemies are coming in from one direction, you've got a lot of cover here. So that feels like intimate in that kind of aspect. And personal space would be like kind of, in Modern Warfare 4, there was a map which was, basically it was just all these crates like packed on one another. It was one of their more memorable maps. It's just all these shipping crates. And it was just you normally used for a deathmatch. It was frustrating, but all the kind of lanes were the same sort of length in terms of width and that. And you had all these people using that, and that felt more personal because you could have two people kind of moving past one another and stuff like that that you can use to help have a bit more of a personal space to it. Does that answer your question? Yeah. She said yeah, but a bit tentatively, so we're not too sure. Do we have any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you ever violate an intimate space for a player, or once you do that, are you kind of screwed?
No, it's yeah. So yeah, I mean that's what makes that game memorable for it. It depends what you're going for. Like it should be about that of the meaning of your game. It's not just about I would say that you should just subvert it like that. When you have these things, make sure you're doing it for the right reason though. Like if you're going to do that, probably do it later on in the game, so that way it feels a bit more unsure as you progress in the game as well. Then maybe they'll be unsure next time, is this safe or not? So I recommend you can do it. None of these things are hard rules. These are just guidelines. Whatever you want to use them for, you can use them for, and that sort of thing. It's still a pretty nice slide. I hope does that answer your question, mate? Cheers, thank you, sir. No one else. Do you have any more of this intermission QA? Cool.
I have.
Okay, awesome.
Wait.
How do you usually define what share of the space must be personal or intimate space or some other space?
Well, I mean, it's all about pacing of your mission. In terms of having that sort of thing, it depends what you're going for, because we got cut off. That's way back. Sorry. We got cut off because there's different types of other spaces. There was social and then public space. So social space is generally going to be used for that of where you'll have your combat or more kind of your villages. And as for defining how much, it shouldn't be a checklist to you. It shouldn't be like that. It should be what feels right. The picture I had of the division with all the kind of safe houses, we went through multiple iterations before we decided on how many that we had, because sometimes we found that players would rest too much or there wasn't enough for them. It's about finding what's right for your game. I know that's kind of a vague answer, but with level design, there isn't like a hard necessary rule. It's all in good of your game. So I find that public spaces are the ones that you're going to use most often, because they're going to be the spaces that you use to move throughout and through your level. That's hard to say on that one. So I'm sorry I can't give you like a hard number, but again, do it and just test it. Testing is such an important part of level design, where just do it for what makes it feel right. There's going to be a lot of contrast. As I said, social space was going to be the next one on the talk. And that was going to be about how you interact with people from there and different sort of enemies. So use them mainly for downbeats as well. Personal space is the best time to use them, is what I'd say. So. Cool. Sorry about that. That was definitely scripted, rehearsed, and everything. I just wanted to make you wait. But no, I'm sorry about that. Cheers, guys, for getting that sorted. So another space that we have is the social space. This is going to be the space that you actually interact with either the enemies, that whether it be that sort of the fishbowl kind of feel that it has in God of War, to these more arena kind of shooters that you see in sort of the Division. But it's not just about that, it's also spaces where you can interact with other people. If you think of World of Warcraft with Stormwind or Ironforge, these are all spots where you can socialize, whether it be the auction house, the bank, all these things here. And again, this isn't a hard rule, but generally you find personal space will lead to social space. So you feel that bigger contrast when doing it. And then finally, we have public space. Now, public space will just either be your whole open world or the whole level, because this space is public to the enemies and the other people around us. So now we got to know, why is that important to us? We've answered already some short Q&A on this, but we use that as well to help guide us. This is Krakow here. Now, I've recently moved out there to Poland, and I didn't know where I was and what to do, and I don't speak the language very well. Mi Polska mała, which I believe I've said and butchered, means I am a dog. So, but no, it just means I speak very little Polish. But what's really cool is I decided I wanted to go out and go for a walk. I wanted to explore the city. I wanted to know about it. And this here was my hotel. This was my intimate space. I knew this is where I slept, where I eat, so I always knew this is where I should know where to come back to, making this a key point for me. Then I decided, yeah, I'm gonna go explore. And if anyone has seen the state of my phone, it is broken and it decided to die on me, which is great. But I still thought, I'm gonna go out and explore. I then went off and I found this mall here, which was that social space. I knew that I could then talk to people in order to know more about this. And then I was looking for the most famous cathedral in Krakow. And because it's such a large one, it was a landmark. And because of this, it was a public space. And I was able to connect these spaces together in order to know and create that mental map of how I went from one space to another to find out where to go. Now that we've done all this and we've had a great, great fun time, we're going to talk about how do we actually make these mental maps for players. Now, there's quite a lot of ways to do this, but I am shorter on time now. And there's loads of different ways, from landmarks, the negative space, positive space, shapes, colors. All of this can apply to help people understand and create that mental map. However, I'm just going to share you some of my favorites and some that I've learned throughout my career. And the first one is that of readability, making sure that players understand how this space around them works, how they see the level. Now, this is a great quote from Clement, who is a level designer at working on Star Citizen. And it's about making sure that when you make games, we mostly know that players just move throughout them very fast. They very rarely stop to look around. So when doing this, make sure that you have symmetry in certain levels. This bottom picture here is a picture from Wolfenstein, and it's very symmetrical so that they can see right away in taking the information that the layout is very clear towards them, that you can still move to the left to right and how that whole space connects. And a way to help do that also is by having simple shapes. By having these simple shapes, players also understand what's important and what isn't important throughout the layouts. And here is the best way, is reduce clutter. We have the image on the left and the image on the right. And as you can see from this, that the image on the left, you have no idea where you're supposed to go in this space. Yet the one on the right, you know that those stairs are important. By keeping things clear, the player can instantly understand when they enter this level. Now, there's other ways that we can use it through landmarks and weenies. Landmarks are a great way for players to understand what their goal is a point to help orientate them as they progress throughout the level. Now, if you're wondering how the whole weenie term came about, it comes from Mr. Walt Disney, as he would guide his dog with using a weenie sausage around the garden. And you're wondering, why is that important? Well, because he applied that theory to Disneyland. There's a great talk at GDC in, I think, 2009, where a level designer breaks down why Disneyland is so important to us as level designers. I can only talk briefly on this, which is, ooh, look at that sexy animation. No expense was spared for you. And this is the Disney castle. This is super important because the player will enter from the bottom, and the first thing they'll see is that Disney castle. And part of the reason it stands out is by having, as we just spoke about then, those simple shapes. All the other buildings are more boxy compared to this more exotic shape of the castle. And what's just happened is subconsciously people just now know the fact that if I want to go and leave this park, I just have to find that castle because the car park is right behind me from it. This is also used for great meeting points. And what they've also done is they've then applied these landmarks to other areas as well. by having such things as Space Mountain, this Aztec temple, it helps people understand where they are in the park as well. And those are the difference between a local and a global landmarks that we have. If we're going to use the example of Journey, local helps the player understand where they currently are. If we look at this graveyard, you can only see it when you approach it. It helps players understand if they get lost and they re-find it again, they know this is where I've been here before, and it understands how they connect one another. Then we have the global one, such as the mountain. You'll see that mountain throughout the entire game, and it's important because the player needs to know that they are progressing through the level, that they're getting closer as they move through it. And what's really important as well, and I'll talk about Naughty Dog, is that they do great things with their landmarks because the player is able to see it from different angles. So make sure when you're creating these global landmarks that it doesn't look the same from every angle, because it allows the player from when you first see it, maybe just facing the front, to then you face it looking down at it on the right, you start to understand how the space is all connected. So having these sort of things helps players understand them. And then what's really cool is geologists actually rate the landmarks that when they're doing, the impact it has on the environment around it, how large is it growing and is it expanding. And I think we as level designers can apply that as well. When you're doing your landmarks, think how important does this need to be? Does it need to be a local or a global? Does it have to make sure it has a unique shape? Does it need to be that memorable? How do you interact with that space as well? And does that change? Now we're talking about vantage point and decision points. This here is another example that I created for Division. But before we get onto that quote there, how we perceive the world comes from how we see it. That's really important because I want you to just look at this room where you are now. Those of you who are sat closer to me, when you look without turning your head that much, you're just going to see a limited part of this room. Those of you who sat right at the back are going to see much more of this space. And that's interesting and important to you as a level designer, because if you want the player to explore your level more, don't show as much, because that encourages exploration. If you want the player to understand the space for such as a combat encounter, then show more so that they have an understanding of where they can advance and use for cover. In this example here, and you see those two number 3s at the back, they're these strong kind of sniper points. And at the time, we didn't actually have this truck here. And when we noticed that people weren't going to these strong vantage points, and it was a real shame. However, as soon as we raised them up on this truck, they took more notice because of that. All it took was a raising of level for them to understand the space much better, helping them understand your layout for a better mental map. Now, we're going to try blitz through these because of time, guys, sadly. But think about size. And when you think about size, this is a subconscious thing for us, right? If you think about a main road, you know because of the bigger lanes that this is probably leading towards a city. Because of this, you know that there's going to be more people around us. But if we have a small side road, we know there's going to be less people. And all of this is important because then we can apply it to such things as doors. These are two different doors from Titanfall 2, where the fact that understanding that you have these big doors, they knew it's important that you have to go through these to progress. But if you have these smaller doors, they're used for flanking routes or loot. All of these help players understand where they need to go. As they keep moving forward, they'll know if they want to, they have to go through these bigger doors. And all that makes them understand how your level works. And then we have shape theory, which originally what this talk was going to be about. Now, shape theory, it comes from many different ways and applies to us. But I'm sure many of you have seen this test where you have these two shapes and there's two random words, Kiki and Bubwa. Now, most people, 98% of people say that Kiki and Bubwa go to these two shapes. And it's important to know that because of the fact that now we understand a bit more about how the brain works. Because when you look at characters, shape theory is so important to characters. We have that which is the more evil characters are sharp and pointy, Maleficent being a prime example. And it's no coincidence that the most famous child character is 3 circles, softer, rounder, and cuddlier. And then squares are used for people more stuck in their ways, don't want to expand or learn. And that's great and all, but how do we apply it to our levels? Well, if we look at this picture, people getting married, oh, really nice moment. But we want to look at the stairs here, because what they do is make the top of an arrowhead a triangle pointing and leading players. By using this for our geometry, we can help do things to guide players. And this here is a slide taken from Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which I do recommend everyone play. they talked about when they're creating their open world, they made a lot out of triangles simply because the fact that triangles had a different form of movement on people. They would either go to the top in order to see everything or move around it. So you can use shapes to encourage different types of movement in your layout. And a really cool thing is, if you think about corridors, why they're rectangles, the reason for that is because they help pull and push people in the space. There is no resting spot in a rectangle. So when you see it, you are subconsciously moved through it. And then we can use these to look at the Pantheon, which is in Rome, beautiful building. And all it is just a rectangle and a circle. But it works perfectly together simply because when you're pulled in by the rectangle, you're drawn to the center, and then you're then encouraged to move around it and then pulled straight back out. We can use these different types of shapes for different kind of combat or environment storytelling as well. And then finally, we have like how we combine them with landmarks. This is a great building, a great picture here. If you look at it, it's a triangle pointing the player down towards where the entrance is. And they have those really nice lights and lines, which again help reinforce where the player should go. Now we've got a bit on color. I'm going to breeze past this one a bit because this is a video, so I don't really want to push on a video on this one. But yeah, there's many different meanings to many different types of color. And Wolfenstein is a great example. I'm not going to play the video, but you can see in the background in that door here, there is that yellow light. And this is at the beginning of the game where this guy, your ally, is killed. Now they're using yellow solely on the fact that this is caution. Be prepared that you can take damage here. And it's only reinforced when you see your ally shot as soon as he leaves behind this cover. And then the enemy, which shoots that guy, is drowning in red light. And the reason for this is to show that this is danger. You should be scared of this person. So we can use that in different ways to help player understand, such as red sort of lights for enemies that help player understand as they move throughout the space. Then we have the division map. What's really cool the environment artist came up with was that each kind of district would have these different sort of color coding in it. So that way you knew as you progress, as you'd leave one district, you'd see another. So all of these would help players understand the map around them. And then finally we have the entrance and exits. When you think about this, think about how you reveal and you show certain information. So with these, you should think how you keep it simple, how you allow the player to see your entrance and other, and they can piece it together. Because they can see that if you have these two doors, that you can move through them. They don't know the path in between, but they know that these are connected. Make sure that you keep it short and simple, because if the player is unable to read how things are connected, then they won't understand and get confused in your levels. And then finally, keep your visual language consistent. If you come through a door and somehow end through a vent, then you might not know how these even work or connect together. So when you next see a vent, you don't know where that will lead you. By having a consistent visual language, players will understand and be able to put two and two together. I was going to show some real stuff, but not out of time. I just want to thank these people who helped me. Jay is our urban planner. She's helped me, and she's a former architect to see things a bit different. And Alex to make things pretty, so you don't have to look at my ugly face. You have to look at it a bit more because of technical difficulties, so I apologize. So thank you all. I know it's not been the smoothest, but I do appreciate your time and watching because of this. If you want to know more, I'm up on Twitter @MaxPairs. If you can't get enough of this beautiful smooth jazz, then I do have a podcast talking more about level design, and it's a lot smoother than what happened here today. So thank you, and I'm sorry about everything. Cheers for help, mate. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. It's all right. It's all right.
In the middle, but really had during that technical problem we had some time to ask questions, but I hope you have more. Raise your hand.
Cool.
Thank you for your presentation. I want to ask about how you prototype the first ideas for the level. If you use pen and paper, or you play with Lego, or how you do it.
I wish I had my Lego. My dad threw them all out, you know. I was telling him it's for my career. He's like, when you're 20 years old, Max, you can't have Lego. So, but no, it depends, mate. Depends on the time that we have. Generally, I'll start with a paper design for me. But you've got to understand when you're doing paper design, what works on 2D might not work on 3D. So I tend to sketch something out, make sure I'm doing a ton of research. Research is like super important. Like you need at least minimum 50 images of what you're going to create, in my opinion, floor plans, all of this to help you have a better understanding. Once I see things I like from the research, I'll then start to draw it out. After that, I'll just do some, quick blockouts and play test them. Does that work? Does that not work? And then start iterating from there. But generally, it starts with my research, and then it'll move on to paper design. For me personally, I know some people who don't do paper design at all. It's what's best for you as a designer, in my opinion. So I hope that answers.
Thanks for the presentation as well.
Always wrong.
Imagine mobile gaming when the view is limited, apart from what we've seen on the screenshot. It's not first person and not third person. Or even the PC games, well, as a metric, for example. How do you use personal space, like local, global, these landmarks, in order to present the player where he is and where he needs to go?
So that's a great one. I don't know if you've seen Hyperlight Drifter. That's a great example of how they do things. But the tools that I gave then, some of them you won't be able to use exactly how in a first or third person. A lot more, and I don't really touch enough about this in this presentation, is sound. Having that sort of sound is a great way for it. And then what Hyperlight Drifter does really well is it still has these great landmarks, you know, the skeletons of these great monsters that once were. So that way when you come back to the space, you still know. But they're using them in different ways. They use more local than global landmarks. They also do great things where you can do stuff like certain paths, you know, like if you have worn out grass, you know that that's probably the main path that you should take. So little things like that can help. I think you're going to also rely a lot on color to help people understand there. So again, not all the tools you can take can apply to every game, but it's about understanding the tools that you have and trying to push them. So I hope that helps there, mate. No worries. Thank you, sir. Cool. I'll wrap it up there.
Okay. Thank you very much for your speech.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. Sorry about that. Cheers.